Sunday morning at the drop, 7 a.m., Felix could be seen returning to the apartment complex from the cafeteria. Anyone who walked by him didn't dare even greet him, as his knitted eyebrows and lowered head were clear indications of having a bad morning. Felix truly experienced a bad morning, since he didn't sleep a wink last night, with all of the negative thoughts roaming in his head about the concoction. The first time he ordered this potion, he also experienced the same feeling, but thankfully the results were optimistic. No need to worry. Felix comforted himself. 49% is a high success chance, and Madame Hala didn't disappoint me last time. Cluck. After entering his room and closing the door behind him, Felix laid on the bed and logged in. When he constructed his Androxa home, he waited patiently for a call from Madame Hala's assistant. Thankfully, the witches were known for their respect for time, and Felix wasn't left waiting for even a minute before receiving a call. "Hello, Mr. Felix, Madame Hala is waiting for you in her lab," the assistant informed politely. "Thank you." Felix nodded his head and inquired, "Is there anything I need to know before meeting her? I don't want to step on her toes without knowing about it." Don't curse, yell, get too close to her, or ask too many questions. You know what? Just sit in the corner and watch," the assistant said. "I am fine with that." Felix accepted. "Alright, please enter Madame Hala's UVR ID in your bracelet," and activated the synchronize feature. The assistant requested. Felix did as he was told and informed the assistant that it was done. After waiting a couple of seconds, the Queen informed him that Madame Hala had accepted the synchronization. Then, he turned on the ghosting feature and informed the assistant about it. "Alright, just close your eyes and accept the invitation when Madame Hala sends it to you." The assistant said her goodbyes. After she was gone, Felix laid on his bed and closed his eyes shut. A couple of seconds later, the Queen told him about the invitation and Felix accepted it in a heartbeat. Chirp chirp, SCSSH. Felix's body had reconstructed to the music sung by nature itself. As the birds chirped, the insects wheezed, and a hot summer wind blew on his face. Feeling refreshed by the warm and cozy atmosphere, Felix opened his eyes with a pleased expression. Immediately after, he was met with a wide-open window that had its curtains flailing by the wind and the sunlight reflecting on its glass. Before anything, he looked outside the window and saw plenty of pink trees that had their leaves blowing by the breeze, while small birds nested on their branches. Although he was merely a holographic body that was created by his bracelet and sent to Madame Hala's bracelet to bring him into the real world, he was still able to feel everything due to the synchronize feature. A small breeze touching his holographic cheek would be processed by the Queen instantly and make Felix's brain react to it like it had truly happened. Naturally, he couldn't really interact with anything, like holding a cup or something. But Felix wasn't complaining in the slightest. Cluck. Alas, Felix's enjoyment in nature was interrupted by the window getting forcefully closed and the curtains getting pulled up, blocking every sun ray from reaching the room he was inside. "I will start the concoction process now." Felix turned around after hearing an enticing voice echo in the room. After seeing Madame Hala standing behind 3 tables filled with almost the same equipment and materials in Lady Sphinx scene, Felix smiled charmingly without commenting. Madame Hala started the concoction process by setting all of Felix's materials on the left table. But Felix didn't focus on them for now, as he appreciated Madame Hala's breathtaking beauty that could give even the prettiest human girl a run for her money. First, she resembled humans immensely in her body shape and skin, as she was 1.7 meters in height and her skin was a bit tanned. She was well endowed with her physical assets, making Felix glance once or twice at them. Meanwhile, her face was somewhat like humans, but her ears were longer and bent down, her eyes were scarlet, her nose was a tiny button while her lips were plump and scarlet just like her eyes. She was wearing a wholly black uniform and had its sleeves stretched out, dangling by her elbow and exposing her forearm. In her right chest, there was a logo that was surrendered by some peculiar-looking inscriptions. Meanwhile, Felix couldn't see her hair fully as she was wearing a pointy black hat that goes well with her uniform. Yet, before he could continue his outright ogling, he was surprised to see an extremely long thin tail emerge from behind her and start gazing at him from above. That's right, the tail's end was gazing at Felix, since it was a huge scarlet eye surrendered by 5 black petals. It was as big as Madame Hala's head, and when it blinks, it resembles an orchid flower. So that's how Madame Hala's spiritual eye looks like. Felix was fascinated by it but not stunned, as he knew about its existence beforehand. It was common knowledge in the UVR that the witches weren't born from two parents but grew from special soil just like plants. That spiritual eye was in fact a flower that grew from the soil until it reaches 3 meters in height. While under the soil, the body of the witch gets created in a cocoon by itself. If Felix recalled properly, the spiritual eye opened up and started absorbing the sunlight in the day and starlight at night to provide nutrition to its body inside the cocoon. This process usually takes a couple of years until a witch emerges from the cocoon fully nude and digs herself upward. Although witches' origin was clearly from a plant, their bodies were still based on flesh and blood just like humans. They still need to eat, drink, and fulfill other biological needs. The only difference between them was that the witches didn't have a gender or a reproduction system. They sure appear as gorgeous as goddesses, but they didn't have any sexual orientation towards anything. That's why Felix was ogling Madame Hala before without worrying about being seen as rude, since she never considers him someone from the other sex. In her eyes, Felix was no different than a monkey just like every male in the universe. So, the Forsythia witch empire was truly filled with witches that were considered top-notch beauties, but in reality no male desired to live in such a place where they could only feast their eyes without having action. It was pure torture, and anyone who thinks otherwise was asking for a beating. "Are you done staring?" Madame Hala asked calmly, breaking Felix's thought process. "Yes, sorry about that." Felix smiled faintly while glancing at the materials that were fully prepared on the left table. Felix read yesterday that this table was called preparation table by witches. It was meant for materials to be worked upon, like cleaned, extracting the essence from them, removing some parts, etc. He could see that the dawntree leaf was cut into 4 parts and placed on a small glass bowl. Meanwhile, the 2 voidling scales and the golem brass had been sparkled by the dark starfly dust and placed together in a glass plate. On the other hand, the 20 purity fountain drops had been poured into a small transparent flask and placed on the glassware table. Lastly, the uncommon elemental flower had all of its petals removed and grounded together, creating a rainbow-like paste kept in a granite mortar bowl with its pestle. Those were all of the elemental potion materials that Felix had purchased and sent to her. 4.6 billion SC and 12 KGP were placed on that preparation table. Yet, Madame Hala's reaction was the same as someone seeing bread on the table for over 10 years now. "I will start now." Madame Hala requested calmly, "Please don't make a sound." Felix nodded his head and narrowed his eyes in focus at Madame Hala, who started the concoction process by opening the lid of a bronze cauldron that had its inscriptions brightened up. She poured the flask that was filled with fountain purity dropped inside and pressed on a button that was at the side of the circular table where the cauldron was placed at. Orange flames burst beneath the cauldron and started heating the room slightly. Even Felix felt that it was getting hotter. Madame Hala waited for exactly 5 seconds before throwing 1 slice of the dawntree leaf. She repeated the same process with the other 3, waiting exactly 5 seconds each time. After she was done, she closed the lid and waited silently and patiently for an entire 2 minutes before opening the lid again. Whoosh, a familiar fragrant aroma escaped from the lid and drifted in the room until it assaulted Felix's nose, making him remember the time where he drunk the elemental potion. Before he could bath in it, Madame Hala closed the lid again and waited for an additional minute. But this time, she was holding the granite mortar in her hand. Whoosh, when she opened up the lid, she quickly poured the uncommon elemental flower paste inside the bubbling milky white concoction. However, instead of closing the lid, she did the unexpected by bringing her spiritual eye up close to the concoction and froze like that. Felix went as silent as a mouse after seeing so. He knew that Madame Hala had just gone microscopic, and it was the most important step in a concoction that would decide whether it would turn into a useful potion or a useless goo. He didn't know the full theory of it as it wasn't published, but he understood that those spiritual eyes were the reason for the witches having the sole ability to concoct potions. It allowed them to examine the concoction at a microscopic level and use their mental energy to stop the concoction from turning bad. If it wasn't for it, the mental energy would never be used at such a microscopic level. Gadgets, equipment, and such were all useless, since even if one was able to see at a microscopic level, his mental energy would not shrink to that level. Felix knew that without this step, the ingredients used wouldn't combine, absorb, or react to each other positively. If he went and tried to concoct the potion, he wouldn't even know how it failed. That goes to everyone without those spiritual eyes. That's why he was shocked by Lady Sphinx's ability to concoct. She started using the secondary materials. Felix commentated in his mind while watching Madame Hala through an coated Voidling scale. After so, the bubbling milky white concoction had its intensity reduced. Felix was able to see all of this since he was hovering in the air for better visibility. After a couple of seconds, the bubbles had increased in number again and Madame Hala threw in the last coated Voidling scale. When it was pacified, she hastily threw in the golem brass and sealed the lid shut. Then, she turned on the heat, making the cauldron shake while the lid clutter around, appearing like a monster was sealed inside trying his best to burst out. Both Felix and Madame Hala held their breaths in anticipation and worry as they knew that this was the decisive moment of the concoction that had no relation to the potioneer. With everything that Madame Hala had done, the chance of the potion turning successful was still just 49%. Considering that this was an elemental potion, the chance was quite high for a rank 3 witch. Come on, please, please, please. Felix kept praying piteously with his hands folded, appearing like a devoted believer. While he was praying, the lid was shaking harder and harder until Madame Hala started showing signs of disappointment and gloom. Upon seeing those signs, Felix felt his heart break into pieces as he knew what was about to come, but he didn't dare to believe it. No, he didn't want to believe it. Alas! Boom! An abrupt explosion went off inside the cauldron, producing the noise but not the actual effect as it was suppressed inside of it. Peep! A second later, a stream of smoke surged out of a tiny hole on the lid, producing ear-piercing noise due to the suppressed smoke wanting to exit the cauldron all at once. At this moment, only that noise was resounding in the room as neither Madame Hala nor Felix was speaking. While Madame Hala was sighing in disappointment and had an apologetic expression, Felix was gazing at the ceiling with a deadpan expression. Told you that you are going to jinx it. Brutal as always, Asna added salt to Felix's wounds by mentioning, now look at your stupid face, I can hear your heartstrings snapping from here. It failed, my materials, my money, my game points, all lost. Unresponsive to Asna's taunts, Felix kept murmuring to himself in a daze. Seeing how hard he got hit by the misfortune, Madame Hala decided to comfort him by mentioning, I don't know if someone told you or not, but if you hired me again after I failed, the fees of the next concoction would be halved. If I failed again, the fees would be removed entirely. Alas, Felix wasn't comforted even slightly as he knew that he would need to collect the materials again, causing him to waste another 4 billion SC and 12k GP at least. I should have bought it in the auction and got it over with. Regret started to wash over Felix like a tide after recalling that he gave up on the elemental potion for 9 billion SC. Although it was double the price, at least he wouldn't have been stressing himself over the concoction. Sigh. Madame Hala, no need to feel bad for me. Felix let out a long exhale through his nose, calming himself down, and said, you did a wonderful job but luck wasn't in our side. Madame Hala felt even more guilty after hearing so. She hated seeing her potions failing, and especially if the potion belonged to a client that paid a hefty amount of coins to trust in her skills. I wish that you could trust me again with another concoction attempt. Madame Hala said with her head bowed slightly. She was cold at the start, not paying Felix any attention, but when she messed up, she didn't hesitate to lower her head for her failure. Felix respected that as he knew that some witches would merely shrug their shoulders like it was not a biggie. If I decided to go for it again, you will be my first choice. Felix said, smiling faintly. I am glad. Madame Hala smiled beautifully. May I ask if there is any elemental potion in your possession or a sister of yours? Felix asked with a hopeful tone. Sorry, all the potions that I make are either pre-ordered in bulk by backgrounds or by clients like you. Madame Hala shook her head, my sisters are all like this. That's a shame. Felix sighed and said, I better get going, I don't want to waste your time. Then, his holographic image had broken into light particles and disappeared from the room. Madame Hala massaged her neck at the sight and started to clean up the tables, preparing for the next potion concoction. After Felix returned to his Androxa house, he didn't say a word as he simply picked up his car keys and drove to the training center. When he got to his room, he modified it with breakable objects, like glass, cars, tables, etc. Then, he created a sledgehammer and started F***ing the entire place, destroying anything that his furious eyes met. For King Billions. Smash. 4. Smash. Crush. This carried on for at least 10 minutes until the entire area was filled with broken items lying on the ground. Felix was lying in the middle of them with his chest rising up and down. But his expression was calm and collected again, feeling completely refreshed after venting his frustration without being a nuisance to anyone. Now what? Felix said while massaging his temples. He could see that only 2 options were left for him. Collect materials and try again or integrate with his illusion essence. He already has 2% collected and his affinity rating was at 100%. But knowing that he spent a month to get this 2% was a huge turn-off. Because the potion was accessible only in big auctions like the event, he couldn't even buy it. Sigh, I better start collecting them again. Felix decided, but first, let's integrate the last 4%. Felix logged out and started meditating on his bed for an hour until his mind was empty from any thoughts about the potion. Then, he went down to the carpet and brought out all of his materials. Asna, please inform me if Lady Sphinx showed up. Felix requested. Okay. Let's begin. Felix took a deep breath and penetrated his heart with the injection needle. 15 minutes later. Felix was left breathing ruggedly with his face on the carpet. However, a satisfied smile was affixed on his lips due to not fainting. He swiftly drank the rejuvenation potion and while his body was getting healed he was sending messages to Asna. No one showed up. Asna replied lazily while standing in front of her mansion door with the Jormungandr. Give it some time. The Jormungandr said. Felix nodded his head and focused on his body's recovery. 2 minutes later, he sat back up in a meditation position and closed his eyes shut. After he opened them up, he was already in the consciousness space. Felix sprinted towards Asna's mansion and asked after he reached their side, still nothing? Both of them shook their head. Felix frowned his eyebrows and said, Elder, if I still recall, you have taken an hour or 2 before showing up after you woke up, right? To read my memories. Yes. The Jormungandr nodded his head then shook it, but she is not doing the same now since I can't sense her presence in your body at all. It's either she's still asleep or the amount of essence wasn't enough to shape up a tiny part of her consciousness. Felix's heart sank at the news. He always took the primogenitor's waking up for granted. But, it seemed like his thinking was too shallow. I will be waiting for her. Felix said firmly, she is probably still asleep but she will wake up soon enough. Let's play a game of chess while we wait then. The Jormungandr manifested a chessboard and took his seat. Before Felix could take his chair, Asna was already sitting on it indifferently. I don't know why you are rushing to have your ass whooped. Felix taunted while taking a seat next to them. Asna flipped him the finger without glancing in his direction. Felix chuckled while closing his eyes, diving deep in his memories to see what's the peak ability that he had unlocked. In a couple of seconds, he opened his eyes with his eyebrow knitted in confusion. The truth eyes? Felix was bewildered by the name and most especially by the lack of details of this ability as he had found only its name and something called 6class.eom.e.nts. This never happened before since all of the abilities he unlocked always gave him details about their use. Elder, do you know anything about this? Felix asked. The Jormungandr shook his head and said, that oddball is too reclusive and even the primogenitors who were close with her weren't exposed to many of her information and secrets. I see. Felix rubbed his chin and thought, just like Elder's size manipulation, this ability must be the best one in Lady Sphinx's possessions besides her sand manipulation. So, it must be something good. While Asna and the Jormungandr continued their chess game, Felix was left to discover his memories on his own to check if he missed anything crucial. Alas, he ended up with nothing. I guess I can only activate it and see what it does. Felix thought to himself. I will be back in a couple of minutes. Felix left a remark behind while exiting his consciousness space. Then, he logged in and went to the measurement center. After he got in a VIP room, he modified it for vision abilities tests. It simply turned into a room packed with multiple beasts, humans, races, different environments, unique materials, etc. Upon focusing on a single image, Felix called in his mind, firstclass.e.m.e.nt, activate. Immediately after, Felix's golden triangle-like pupil expanded until the three angles had touched his pitch-black irises. The sight resembled a cat's pupil expanding in darkness, adding an extra sense of charm to Felix's appearance. Felix didn't feel a thing, but his vision had received a massive overhaul, making him stagger 2 steps from shock due to the wide range of information that his brain was receiving. Before he could even focus on a single object, the pain started assaulting his brain and followed by a nasty headache and eyes bleeding. Arg. When it got unbearable, Felix closed his eyes shut while deactivating the truth eyes. What the F***ck? He exclaimed the moment he healed himself back to peak form. It wasn't because of excitement but out of bafflement as he realized that he saw nothing. That's right, when he tried to recall what did he see during the activation, his brain didn't feed him the information he saw but just a black image like he was looking at a dark room. It's like his brain was having difficulty reimagining the scene. I am positive that I saw so many things at once. Felix massaged his temples and this time he started thinking of a single object instead of the entire image. Truly, this time he recalled that he saw the inside of fox species beast that was placed randomly in front of him after the room's modification. To be exact, he recalled that he saw only its skeleton in white while the rest appeared gray and foggy. X-ray vision. Felix exclaimed in excitement that he knew that only X-ray vision was capable of letting him see through physical objects in that manner. However, when he attempted to recall the same fox, he was shocked to see the beast was emitting red waves like he was on fire. The hell? Infrared vision. Felix guessed instantly since he had a long experience with this vision. That what shocked him the most, as it was the last thing he expected to see. Yet, just as the image of that fox crossed his mind, Felix was floored to see that everything had turned black and white just like the fox. Guys, are you seeing this? Felix asked in agitation as he had no idea what's going on. He stopped trying to actively try and recall the image since God knows how it would appear this time. It seems like your ability allows you to see everything in the electromagnetic spectrum. The J. or Munganer informed casually. What's that? Felix murmured in confusion, I think I heard of it somewhere. It's the range of the visible light, you dummy. Asna clarified smugly, the electromagnetic spectrum is a map of all the types of light that we can identify. It separates all the types of light by wavelength because that directly relates to how energetic the wave is. The J. or Munganer nodded his head and added after her, more energetic waves have shorter wavelengths while less energetic waves have longer wavelengths. Not all light is in the visible spectrum, which is the light you humans can see. There are many kinds of electromagnetic waves that you can't see. Like infrared light, ultraviolet light, X-ray light, gamma rays, etc. Only after hearing their explanation did Felix remember that he read about it in vision-related class in his clan's school. So the truth eyes allows me to use all of those vision abilities at once. Felix exclaimed in shock and understanding, no wonder my brain failed to process the information. My eyes were using all of those visions at once. That's indeed a hefty load on the brain. The J. or Munganer advised, I am also capable of seeing through the entire electromagnetic spectrum, but I never bother to switch on beyond visible light and infrared light. Every primogenitor that I know had this ability as well but never use it fully as they combine only 2 or 3 visions at once and leave the rest off. I will see if I can do so. Felix nodded his head in understanding. He didn't react much about the primogenitors having this ability since he believed that for beings like them, it was only natural to possess it at their peak. Felix believed that if he got lucky before, he might have unlocked this ability instead of ultra-infrared vision with the J. or Munganer's bloodline. Let's test only X-ray vision. After Felix made his decision, he closed his eyes and ordered in his mind, firstclass.e.m.e.nt, X-ray vision, activate. His golden triangle-like pupil turned a bit dim, but the size remained the same. However, the world in front of Felix was completely different. Everything turned black, like the world was a light candle that had been blown off. Besides, the bones of the beasts in the area and some objects, Felix was truly blind. He lifted his hand in front of his eyes and marveled at the bone structure of his fingers and their connection with the rest of his skeleton. Interesting, it seems like my eyes only accepted the X-ray radiations while blocking off every other light particle. Felix concluded from the test. No wonder Elder combined visible light with other visions. Felix understood that if he turned on his normal vision that every human possessed, the darkness would be replaced with normal background, but he would still be able to see bones and some materials. Previously, Felix was actually doing so with his infrared vision, but he never thought of it that way since he didn't know much about the depth of the light spectrum. Knowing that the entire electromagnetic field had more than 3 visions, Felix was planning on testing them all since every one of them might come in handy in the future. Deactivate. After his pupil regains the golden luster, the world brightened up before Felix like he had his eyelids closed shut before. It seems like muscle, fat, and organs allow more of the X-rays to pass through them. Felix sighed in dejection. Even though it's a primogenitor's ability, I can still see only the bones instead of what lays behind clothes. X-ray vision in comic books and movies is truly just fantasies of us men. Pervert. Asna cursed after hearing his pervy thoughts and what he hoped for X-ray vision to be. The F***Kerr was planning on abusing it to see through the girl's clothes shamelessly. Meanwhile, the J or Munganer was scratching his beard with a thoughtful expression. A second later, he coughed and said, "You can see through the entire electromagnetic spectrum. Be creative in your combinations and your wish shall be achieved." While Asna was glaring at the J or Munganer, Felix grinned widely after getting an indirect confirmation of that idea's feasibility. Perverts. This time Asna grouped them both in her insult, yet neither of them cared much about it. "Don't worry, little Asna." The J or Munganer smiled gently and said, "I never use my abilities on little kids." Understanding what he meant, Asna removed her arms from her chest and insulted him. "Don't call me a kid, you bastard. It's you who is as old as the universe. You are still a kid in my eyes." The J or Munganer rubbed his gawadi while murmuring, "If it was the Sphinx, I might have taken a peek or two. I still remember that she had a fine body." "Oh? I never thought that J.R.M.I. liked my body. I am flattered." Felix, Asna, and even the J or Munganer stiffened in their places after hearing a familiar reposeful voice resound in the consciousness space. A voice they heard just yesterday, making it impossible to forget about it. Gulp. Felix gulped a mouthful in dread while removing that lewd grin from his face. He wished for Lady Sphinx to appear, but he didn't think that she would show herself while he was thinking of ways to abuse her ability for his pervy thoughts. Yet, the J or Munganer was actually the one shocked the most, as he had yet to feel the presence of Lady Sphinx even though she was clearly awake. He knew what could cause this and was displeased by the thought of it. "Show yourself," he said while standing in disgruntlement. "I am right here." A soft breath caressed the J or Munganer's ear as Lady Sphinx emerged from behind him while placing her head on his shoulder. Sigh. "Even you?" The J or Munganer sighed in disappointment while pushing her head away from his shoulder, making her displeased by his rough treatment. "You will be surprised by how many decided to remain," Lady Sphinx said while taking a seat next to the dumbfounded Asna, who had no F***king clue what was going on. Thud. Splosh. Just as the J or Munganer wanted to reply, Felix's body smashed right into the lake beside them, drenching them all at once. Even Lady Sphinx received some welcoming drops on her face and hair. "Welcome, Lady Sphinx, to my humble conscious, yelp." Felix's innocent smile as he spoke was frozen immediately after noticing the mess he created and the displeased glare he was receiving from Lady Sphinx. Before Felix could worry about his life after his shitty first impression got even worse, Lady Sphinx pointed at an empty chair and ordered Felix, "Sit." Not wanting to aggravate her any further, Felix swiftly sat with his head lowered, preferring to avoid looking at her face for now. "I will deal with you later," Lady Sphinx said indifferently to Felix and turned back to the J or Munganer with a faint charming smile. "Why bother come to the pact meeting in the first place and take it with us if you are going to just go against it?" the J or Munganer asked calmly. J.R.M.I., don't be stupid. Lady Sphinx placed a leg above another and confessed, I had no intentions to off myself like all of you. I came to the pack meeting simply because I have reached a roadblock in my research and I needed some fresh inspiration and breather. The more Felix heard, the faster his heartbeat got as he started to understand the gist of their conversation and what it represents. I could imagine you doing so. The J.R.M.I. smiled wryly and said, I am happy that you had something to live for till this day, unlike me. That's only natural. Lady Sphinx said with a tingle of obsession, why would I kill myself when I have yet to discover even 20% of the universe's secrets? 20%? The J.R.M.I. raised his eyebrow in surprise, you have truly gone a long way. I am genuinely impressed. I am still not knowledgeable enough. Lady Sphinx said humbly, appearing like she truly meant it. That made J.R.M.I. respect her even more as he understood that 20% of the universe's secrets was already an achievement that he never thought was possible. If his knowledge could be compared to the Sphinx, he knew that he wouldn't have even 1% of what she owned. Can you tell me what happened after the pact? The J.R.M.I. frowned his eyebrows, you said that many others decided to reign it. I doubt that all of them had the same reason as you. Otherwise, they wouldn't need to take it with us. Alas, the only response he received was Lady Sphinx's expression turning playful as she said, some try to hide, some try to cheat, but time will show, we always will meet. Try as you might to guess my name. After all this time, you still haven't changed this annoying habit of yours. The J.R.M.I. facepalmed in vexation after remembering that she had said more than 10 sentences since the moment she showed herself. That meant, a riddle must be answered. Otherwise, she would not entertain his questions for at least a day. Am I, destiny, time, or death? Lady Sphinx asked with a playful smile. Before Felix or Asna could even think about the content of the riddle, the J.R.M.I. replied nonchalantly, it's death. I am way too familiar with him. I gave you an easy one since we haven't met for at least 1 billion years now. Lady Sphinx clapped her hands elegantly for a second before saying, I will tell you later about the aftermath of the pact. Do know that you won't like it one bit. All right. The J.R.M.I. said with a frown. Upon hearing so, Lady Sphinx turned her head to Asna and joked, your race has been giving me a lot of trouble recently. Oh? How so? Asna tilted her head in confusion. How can I find out about the universe's secrets when they are watching over the laws like hound dogs? Lady Sphinx sighed in irritation, especially Space and Time Uni-Jin Guardian. Well, it's their duty. Asna shrugged her shoulders lazily. How about you? Lady Sphinx asked Asna, why are you here instead of doing your duty? Is this your way of avoiding the universe's deduction to laze around? Oh? You didn't read this idiot's memories? Asna said while pointing her finger at Felix who was sweating buckets from his forehead. Meanwhile, his thoughts had been in disarray the instant he concluded from their conversation that Lady Sphinx was still alive. He always assumed that she was dead since the J.R.M.I. told him that he saw her in the pack meeting, but it seemed like he got bamboozled just like the J.R.M.I. What's worse, he had no *king clue what she was going to do to him now. Forget about the sand manipulation, Felix was fearing for his life. If it wasn't for the elder's promise that he would be fine, Felix would have been left without tears to cry. Right now, he decided to keep his head low and listen to their conversation until she addresses him personally. I was in the process of doing so before J.R.M.I. decided to act like a pervert. Lady Sphinx said. The J.R.M.I. coughed while fixing his chess pieces, acting like he didn't hear her. Asna chuckled and said, I will tell you about the story later on. It's a long one. Lady Sphinx nodded her head and smiled playfully to Asna, this thing all things devour, birds, beasts, trees, flowers, gnaws iron, bites steel, grinds hard stones to meal, slays kings, ruins towns, and beats high mountains down. What am I? Armies, time, nature? Lady Sphinx rested her cheeks on her palms while staring at Asna in anticipation. You better answer it or she will ignore you for 24 hours straight. the J or Mungander advised while pondering on the riddle. It's easy. Asna answered smugly, it's time. Because it's the only thing that is universal when it came to devouring all things. Correct. Lady Sphinx smiled beautifully and turned her attention to Felix, making him flinch in his place. Upon reading his thoughts, her tone turned cold all of a sudden. Idiot, you think I will kill you just because you collected a tiny piece of my consciousness? You won't? Felix raised his head with a relieved expression. No, but I will kill you for disturbing my focus when I was concocting an important potion. She narrowed her eyes frigidly and said, you have no idea how I struggled to collect the materials for that potion, and now it's all gone because of you. Felix felt like he was thrown into the depth of despair after hearing so. His body started trembling while his heart started pumping adrenaline, wanting to help him escape from those two cold eyes. He knew that she meant business and his life was attached by a piece of string. Elder, it was truly no intentional. Scared shitless, Felix bowed his head deeply until it almost touched the table, but he still was apologizing. If I knew that Elder was alive, I would have never ever considered bothering you like this. Truly. I don't care if you apologized once or a billion times. Lady Sphinx crossed her arms above her and proclaimed, it will not bring back my materials. Killing me will also not bring them back. Felix said tearfully while pointing at Asna and the J or Mungander, if you killed me, you will end up killing them both. Lady Sphinx glanced at them and said speechlessly, do they look like they care about dying? Felix was left horrified when he saw that none of them seemed like they were bothered by it. He could understand that the J or Mungander didn't care much if he died now or a couple of months, but seeing Asna's nonchalance made him realize that she was probably starting to get depressed in his consciousness space. Alas, he had no time to think about Asna's matters when his life was on the line. Elder, save me. Felix beseeched in his mind, you said that I will be fine when I awaken her since you are here. Cough, that's before I knew that she wasn't dead. The J or Mungander said with a wry smile, with her being alive in real life, her consciousness could easily overpower mine since I am just a tiny piece while she could channel all of her mental energy from her real body, stopping her is just impossible. Felix almost flipped the table after hearing so. He still remembered the J or Mungander's face when he promised him confidently that he would be alright. But seeing him scratching his beard in silence, made Felix realize that he was as unreliable as him.